Thank you everyone for joining us today. My name is Merle Massey. I'm the coordinator for undergraduate research here at the University of Saskatchewan. And one of the programs that I run is SURE, Student Undergraduate Research Experience. Thank you so much for joining us. We have a really great session today, and I think they're going to have a few more students popping in as we get going. But today we have Brock Egeto, and he is not from the Student Employment and Career Center, but from Career Services here on campus. They went through a name change, so this is highly forgivable. I do the same thing. But Brock, I'm going to turn it directly over to you, creating effective resumes and cover letters.
Yes, thank you, Merle. And I totally missed that. We're career services now, not the Student Employment and Career Center.
That's
Obviously,
all right. I've been finding it even when I share something with you, I found that that's still coming up. So the USask internal system hasn't caught up with you yet either. So
I was just testing you, and you passed the test with flying colors. So, well,
attaboy. That's good to know. Thanks, Brock.
yeah. Okay, so yeah, my name is Brock. I am an experiential learning coordinator at Career Services. And so I do a lot of work with both students and employers, as well as faculty and staff on campus, really about helping students with that transition from university into careers or even into summer jobs, internships, that sort of thing. So really helping them, with that recruitment process and understanding how to better market themselves to potential employers. And so what I'm going to talk about today is part of that process. Talking about resumes and cover letters mostly. I'm going to talk a little bit about CVs as well, just so that you can understand the difference, at least in the Canadian context, between what a resume is and what a CV is. So with that said, I'm going to jump in here, and I'm really going to talk just for about a half an hour or so about this, and then I'll open it up to any questions that you might have. So to start off with, your job search documents, I think it's pretty obvious what their main purpose is. It's really your opportunity to introduce yourself for the first time to a potential employer. Um, these documents are a really important opportunity for you to showcase your written communication skill set. And so it's really important to keep that in mind. It is a core skill set that almost any professional job that you might be applying for, that they're going to be looking for in their candidates. So you really want to make sure that you're, proofreading for spelling and grammar and that sort of thing. And really, these documents, what they're trying to do for you is get you to that next point in that recruitment process, which is the interview. So I'll talk about how you can go about being a little bit more effective at getting their attention and hopefully landing that interview. So getting started, there's a few things that I always recommend to people that they do as they're starting to create these documents. So the first thing is really just to take a bit of an inventory of yourself. And so thinking about things like the skill sets that you have, the abilities or personal qualities that you have, obviously your experience, so volunteer work, any kind of extracurricular experience that you might have, your education, obviously. So you're going to be including different elements of all of these things in different resumes and cover letters for different types of positions that you're applying for. A lot of students maybe lack a lot of paid work experience, and they really struggle with what they should include or how to best capture their skill sets in their resume. And so that's quite common. And what I just encourage you to do is think very broadly. It's okay if you don't necessarily have a lot of paid work experience or professional work experience. You can pull from your university experience, for example. So you're going to be doing presentations and group projects at school. So presentations, that's an example of your oral communication skill set. Group projects, that's collaboration and teamwork, crucial skill sets. You might be involved in clubs or student groups or teams even. There is teamwork represented there, leadership, other crucial skill sets. You're going to be doing report writing and data analysis, in and of themselves important skills for many jobs. And of course, hopefully as a student, you're effective in your time management and goal setting. Also very crucial transferable skills that many employers are looking for. Another thing that I encourage you to do, like if you really are lacking experience to draw on to talk about your skill sets, I do encourage you just to go out and get involved in whatever way that you can. So volunteering, co-curricular, extracurricular, a lot of great activities out there that give you an opportunity to both develop and demonstrate your skill sets. So yeah, go out there and get involved. Next, I'd like to talk about how to just properly read a job posting. So this is a step I think a lot of people don't really do well enough. They don't understand the importance of this. But with every application that you're doing, you really want to make sure that you're tailoring your resume, your cover letter, or your CV. You're tailoring that to that specific job description, that specific job posting. And so you need to do a thorough reading of that job description. So I encourage you to go and underline or highlight any keywords related to the skills or competencies that they're looking for, personal qualities that they've identified, uh, obviously knowledge, education that they've identified as being important, and any experience. And as much as possible, you're going to want to speak directly to those things, making a connection between your own skill sets, knowledge, and experience, and then what they've identified in that job posting. And the better that you can make that connection, really the more opportunities you're going to get to go in for the interviews and progress in that recruitment process. So very, very important point here. I also encourage you to save those job postings. So, copy and paste it into a Word doc or a PDF or whatever it is. Job postings that you find online will eventually disappear. You want to make sure that you save that. If you do get that interview, you want to go back to that job posting and really make sure that you know that inside and out before you go in for the interview. So always, always save your job postings. Okay, another important step in preparing these documents is just doing a bit of research on the employer and the industry. So you're going to want to communicate to them, probably in your cover letter and especially in the interview, why specifically you're really interested in that company, that type of position, that industry. And so to do that effectively, you really do need to do your research. So check out the company's webpage or website, their about page. Maybe they have a Wikipedia. You can learn a little bit more about what kind of organization they are, what they do, what their values are, what their mission is. All important things to understand. Maybe there's been some recent news articles about them that you can learn a little bit more about the organization. Maybe you know people that have worked for them in the past or currently work for them. You can also check out LinkedIn and find people who perhaps work in similar types of positions or similar types of positions with that particular company and learn a little bit more that way. So that research is really going to come across, especially in the interview, but I'll talk about how you can communicate that in your cover letter as well. Okay. So you've heard me talk a number of times already about skills and qualities. And so I just want to focus in on this a little bit before moving on to the documents. So recruitment processes, job descriptions, job postings, really, they tend to be focused around skills or competencies, especially now more than ever. And so your effectiveness in moving through that recruitment process and ultimately in getting hired really does come down to your ability to effectively articulate your skills. And a lot of students really struggle with this. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about how to do this more effectively, but I just want to talk a bit about the different kinds of skills that you might see articulated in a job posting or job description, things that the employers will want you to talk about. So when I talk about skills, I talk about them in two different ways. So there's the soft skills or those transferable skills, and then those hard skills, those industry or job specific skill sets. So soft skills, common ones that you'll see identified in job descriptions that you'll see employers looking for are things like professionalism and work ethic, teamwork and collaboration. Oral and written communication is usually top three for just about any job that you're applying to. Critical thinking, problem solving, leadership, adaptability, broad interpersonal skills like empathy, time management and organization. All of those are very common skill sets that you'll see from job to job and industry to industry. So when you're applying to a job, it's probably going to be a combination of certain of these soft skills as well as those hard skills. So those hard skills are those more job specific ones. They might be things that you're learning through your particular program at university. So they could include things like data analysis, web development or web design, marketing, teaching, engineering, accounting, anything like that, that you're learning very specific skill sets to a type of job or type of career, type of discipline. So many jobs are a combination of these two things, and you'll need to be able to speak effectively to both of them. Other things that you might see that are kind of related to skills are personal qualities, and a lot of jobs will identify things like creativity, uh, perceptiveness, openness, even things like passion or enthusiasm. Passion and enthusiasm can be two absolutely essential things that you want to communicate to a potential employer, that you have these for that that type of work, but also that organization or that industry. Those are things that come across maybe a little bit in your cover letter, but certainly they come across in the interview as well. So basically, you want to be able to speak to all of these things. You really want to have a good understanding of what you have, of what you bring to this particular position, to this particular company. Okay, so now we'll move into the actual documents themselves. So we'll start off with resumes, and I threw a statistic in there, 7.4 seconds. So a couple of years ago, I believe it was an HR organization, did a survey of recruiters and HR professionals just to see how long they spend on average looking at a resume. And that was the number that came back with. So 7.4 seconds on average looking at a resume, which is not a lot of time. So a couple of things that will serve you, keeping that quick scan of a resume in mind. First of all, just keeping your document concise. With your resume, especially as a student, you probably don't need to go over 2 pages. Maybe you might push onto 3 pages if you do happen to have a lot of relevant work experience. But for the most part, as a student or even recent graduate, 2 pages tends to be enough. You don't need to include everything that you've ever done, just the most relevant work experience or experience of any kind. Other things that will help, formatting. So things like simple layouts, having bold section headings, like where you say education, work experience, skill sets. So making those bold, underlining them. I'll show you some examples later what good formatting looks like. Making sure that there's white space on the document. There's nothing more exhausting as a recruiter or HR professional than getting a resume that's just a solid block of text. It's very exhausting to look at, especially if you're looking at a lot of resumes in a day. So you want to make sure there's some white space on there. Use bullet points to capture or to elaborate on your skill sets or your experience rather than writing it in paragraph form. It's just easier to read through and skim over. And so just by doing a few of those little things, you can make your documents a little bit easier to skim through for the recruitment professional. It makes it easier for them to go through and find those key pieces of information that they're looking for. They tend to be looking to identify, in that 7.4 seconds, maybe your education, certain skill sets, and then maybe certain experiences that you've had. And so basically, as a recruitment professional, you're doing that initial scan first just to check those boxes. If that person checks those boxes, at that point maybe you're doing a little bit more of a thorough reading of the resume and moving on to the cover letter. So essentially what I'm trying to get across here is that you really want to take the time to make this document as readable and as concise as you can for that recruitment professional. Okay, so there's a few different ways to create your resume and to capture your experience and your skill sets. So we talk about 3 different styles. So there's a chronological, functional, and combination style resume. And the way that you would know which of these to use really depends on how much relevant work experience you have. So if you do have a lot of relevant work experience, you're going to be spending more room on that resume talking about that work experience. So you might want to use either a chronological or combination style resume that include a detailed work experience section. For students or recent grads who do not have a lot of relevant work experience, you're going to maybe want to focus more on a functional style resume or also potentially that combination style resume. So what those do is they include a summary of skills section that really puts the emphasis on the skill sets rather than the experience. And I'll get into how you can do that effectively as well in a couple of slides here. So when you're looking at writing your skill statements, one important thing to keep in mind is to try to highlight what you've actually done and not just what you are capable of doing. So if you're keeping that in mind, you're hopefully avoiding writing some of those generic or cliche sounding statements that you'll see on a lot of resumes, like strong communicator, works well independently or in a team, effective leader, which are, they're very generic. Kind of anybody can make those statements. It's not really backed up by any evidence. And so that's the crucial thing that you want to try to attach to your skill statements is that evidence. And so I'll show you some examples here of how to effectively capture that. So looking at that first one there, community service. So thinking back to that job posting, this would be a community type of position. They've identified that community service is a skill area. And so you've identified that as a skill heading. You might have multiple skill headings in there, and then you're going to have bullet points elaborating on that. And so for this one, what it says here is collaborated with multiple stakeholders to advance new policies, reducing environmental waste in a neighborhood setting. So you'll notice skill words like collaborated there, providing context of the multiple stakeholders, that advancing of new policies, and then that specific evidence is that reducing environmental waste in a neighborhood setting. So as you go, down in that resume and look at that work experience, you'll probably see a point there where that's, work or volunteer experience was. But this up here in the summary skills section, it highlights the skill attached to the particular experience. So another good one here under leadership, organize staffing schedules and manage production capacity for employees at McDonald's, balancing the needs of parents, high school and post-secondary students, and employees holding multiple jobs. So again, you'll notice some of those key skill words that really break down what leadership is. So things like organized and managed. So it's breaking down leadership. The context is, working in McDonald's and, balancing those multiple needs of different types of employees. So that's a really specific piece of evidence to articulate leadership as a skill set. I'll just read one more here. So under communication and collaboration, refined written, listening, and oral communication skills through writing group projects and community service experience. So again, breaking down communication and collaboration. So written, listening, oral communication, that's that breaking down of that skill. And then the experience is that academic writing, group projects, and community service experience. So again, this is ideally how you want to write your skill statements. You might not be able to do it with absolutely every skill that you're talking about, but the more you can do it, the more persuasive that section of your resume will be, and the more persuasive your application as a whole will be. Okay. So moving on to the rest of the resume, some other things that you might see on there, education and academic credentials tends to be at the top or near the top of the resume, especially if you're applying to a professional position. There's that summary of skills. Highlights of qualifications is something that you might see on the first resume style that I showed you, which I'll come back and I'll show you some examples of what that looks like. It's kind of like a summary of skills, just a little bit shorter. Maybe it's like 5 to 7 bullet points. So that's on the chronological style resume. There's different ways to show your work experience. So you could have a section just called work experience. You might have related work experience. If you do related work experience, maybe you want to include supplementary work experience as well. Supplementary is things that are maybe not directly relevant, but there's something about those positions, like maybe they highlight an important skill set. And so for that reason, you want to still include them on your resume. So an example would be like that McDonald's experience. So maybe the McDonald's experience, it's not directly relevant to maybe a web design position that you're applying for. And so you include it in supplementary work experience because it does effectively show that leadership quality. And for that reason, you want to have it on your resume. And so that's just a way of potentially organizing that work experience. Other things that you might include, volunteer experience, community involvement, university involvement, campus activities, extracurricular activities. All those things are kind of similar. A lot of organizations like to see that you are involved in some way outside of work, outside of school, giving back to your community somehow. Again, as I mentioned before, it can be a really good way of developing and demonstrating skill sets that maybe you haven't been able to do through paid work experience to this point. So really nice things to include on your resume. Other things might be scholarships and awards, if that happens to be relevant. Memberships in professional associations, also if that happens to be relevant. Interests and activities, that's more of an optional section. It does kind of do a nice job of maybe giving a little bit more of a well-rounded picture of who you are. So some people will put things like they're, involved in, playing soccer, or they're involved in music, or they just, enjoy being outdoors and that sort of thing. Sometimes it's a way of showing a connection to the type of work that you're applying for. If you don't have any volunteer or work experience that's connected to it, you maybe have some, interests or activities that you participate in that do connect in some way. But again, it's an optional section. You don't necessarily have to include it. And then next, references. And so a lot of people really struggle with the references on their resumes. Standards would be to include 3 references, and kind of your ideal would be to include a supervisor. But whoever you're choosing to include as your reference, what you want to keep in mind is that they need to be able to speak to things like how you get along with other people, your professionalism and your work ethic, and ideally speak to some of the skill sets that you've said you have as well. So supervisors are great because they're kind of that authority person who can speak to those things ideally. Sometimes a supervisor may not be such a good reference if you do not work all that closely with them. In that case, perhaps a coworker or a colleague is a better reference. Again, if they can speak to how you get along with others, what your work ethic is like, and speak to those skill sets. That colleague could be a very effective reference in that case. Other people that you might choose to include, maybe somebody that you volunteered with or volunteered for. Sometimes you can get very good references from volunteering. Sometimes professors, if you have a really good relationship with them, and again, if they can speak to certain skill sets like your work ethic or how you communicate, that kind of thing. If you're struggling with finding that third reference after going through that list, you might consider including what's called a character reference. So a character reference is, for example, like a family friend. So somebody you don't know from like a work or volunteer context or an academic context. They can't necessarily speak to your skill sets, but they can speak to basically your character, what kind of person you are. And so if you're really trying to round out that 3 references, you can include one of those character references. So I think that's all I wanted to say there on references. And so that's resumes, and I'm going to talk very briefly here about CVs and what the difference is. So at least in Canadian context, a CV refers to a very specific kind of document that you would use typically for very specific kinds of positions. So in medicine, they use it. In teaching, academic research, some performing in studio art, they also use CVs. So it tends to be just those specific contexts in which you would use it. Applying for graduate school, they'll always, I think, typically ask for a CV as well. Students really struggle sometimes there because, maybe they don't have the teaching or research experience when they're applying to graduate school. I would tell them that that's okay. Your CV in that case is probably just going to look a lot like your resume, or maybe it's more or less the same document. Sometimes when you're applying for positions, you'll see on job postings that they're asking for a CV. Occasionally, these terms will get used kind of interchangeably, resume and CV. The way that you would know whether or which document to use, if you're applying for just like a typical job and not one of these specific ones, if they say CV, probably they really mean that resume. So I'll just talk a little bit about what a CV actually looks like. So where your resume, I said, should be 2 pages typically, 3 pages max for the most part. CVs, on the other hand, can eventually be multiple pages in length. So as if you're in a research type career, as you're acquiring publications, maybe you're doing teaching, you're starting to include all of these things on your resume, everything that you've ever done in those areas. And eventually your CV can get quite lengthy. I mean, I've seen CVs that are 20 pages or more for people who are later in their careers. So things that you would see on a CV typically would be things like research interests, research experience or professional experience, teaching experience. Publications can get quite lengthy for some people. Conferences, presentations, and posters, professional associations and memberships, honors and grants as well for some people eventually can get quite lengthy. So again, unless you're applying for a position in one of those types of areas, probably you're mostly just going to be doing a resume. Okay, so gonna move on to cover letters now. So a question that we often get is, do employers actually read the cover letters? A lot of people think that they're pointless. Or students who are, job seekers think that maybe that the recruiters aren't really taking them very seriously. So what I would say to that is it kind of depends at what point that particular recruiter is using them in the hiring process or in the review process. So sometimes, as I mentioned, they may be doing a quick skim over your resume first. If they find that you've checked the right boxes for them, maybe they're doing a more thorough reading of that resume then, and then at that point they're moving on to your cover letter to see if you've done a good job of communicating a genuine interest in working for this organization. Some other recruiters might start with the cover letter and see if you've done that little bit of extra effort to communicate a real genuine interest in that position and organization before they even move on to the resume. So it kind of depends. They may or may not get to it, but they're going to be getting to it at some point, and so it's important to take it very seriously. This particular document is one that you're going to be probably doing a little bit more work in customizing or tailoring, even more so than your resume or your CV. What you want to do ideally is make a strong connection to that specific organization or that position or even that department within the organization that really, again, communicates that real genuine interest. So this is where doing your research on that company is going to be helpful. So here's what a standard professional business format cover letter looks like. So you'll see your contact information up top there, your name, city, province, phone number, email address. Generally, that's enough contact information for them. If you have a LinkedIn account, you could include that there as well. Date, company contact info. So the name of the hiring manager, if you happen to have that, if they provided it, company, maybe the departments if that's relevant, and maybe just their city and province as well. You don't necessarily need much more contact info than that. Next, you'll see what's called the ray line, where it says project engineer. The reason for including that is you then don't have to have a sentence in the body of the cover letter saying something like, please accept my application for the project engineer position with Engineering Plus, which I found posted on SaaS Jobs. It's kind of an irrelevant statement. You just skim over it anyway. All you need to do is include that ray line there to identify the position that you're applying for. And if there's a job ID on the job posting, include that there as well. That's helpful for really large organizations, hiring for a lot of positions. Just make sure that it goes to the right person, to the right you know, recruitment committee. So include that ray line. Next, you see there's that address line where it says Dear Ms. Reynolds. So sometimes you don't get that hiring manager's name. That's okay. I would just encourage you to avoid the statements like "to whom it may concern" or "Dear Sir or Madam," which are just kind of like really template-y cover letter language. I would write something more like "Dear Hiring Committee" or "Dear Hiring Manager." It just sounds a little bit more professional. Just kind of overall with the cover letter, try to keep it to one page. You generally would never need to go beyond one page. If you are, it's probably a little bit too lengthy, not concise enough, and you'll probably want to cut out some information to keep it to that one page. You can play around with your spacing and your margins a little bit to try to squish it onto that one page, but generally don't go beyond that. With the body of the cover letter itself, it's usually like 3 to 4 different paragraphs. Opening paragraph, that's where we're going to try to make that direct connection to the organization or to the position. So speaking to maybe what resonates with you, why you're particularly interested in this specific organization. So maybe you're speaking to their values or their mission, something about the industry or the work that they do that really connects with you. And so you're going to make or show that research and thought that you put into that in that opening paragraph. And really, it only takes a sentence or two to make that strong connection there. In the next paragraphs, you're going to think back to that job posting. Think about what are the key things that they were looking for, so the most important skill sets or experience that they've identified. You're not going to speak to everything, just that most important stuff. And again, try to make some kind of connection between what you have and what they're looking for. So connecting your education, your experience, your skills to what they're looking for. And in that last paragraph, that can be a little bit more generic, where you're saying, thank you for accepting my application. I look forward to hearing from you and further discussing my qualifications. You can contact me by phone number or email address above. Something along those lines. Again, it can be a little bit more generic, and that's okay. Lastly, with the cover letter, your sign off there, so where it says sincerely, just keep it professional there. So something like sincerely, regards, kind regards, something like that. And then your name. And you can throw in, if you want, your digital signature. Not required by any means, but it kind of gives it a nice little polish to finish it off. So that's it for cover letter. It's not, very complicated, but a lot of people do find that it takes a lot of time if they're taking it seriously and really trying to tailor it to that specific company and that specific position. And again, that's really what's going to grab their attention. They're going to be really impressed that you've put that thought into why you want to work for them specifically. And so that's how you communicate it at this point in the hiring process. Okay, so I already spoke to that. And just to wrap it up here, a couple of points about applying for positions. So, mostly you're going to be applying on websites like SAS Jobs or your career link, and you're going to be applying through the website. I just encourage you to, always include a PDF version of your resume and cover letter. You can even include it in one document. It just means that your formatting is not going to get thrown out of whack if it's open on a different version of Word or something. So just lock in your formatting so it's nice and clean. Use a PDF. If you are applying by email, in the subject line, really you just need to include, again, that, the job ID, position that you're applying for, maybe your name. In the body of the email itself, you don't need to copy and paste your cover letter or write a whole nother letter in the email itself. You can keep it fairly simple and just say, dear so-and-so, or again, like dear hiring committee, please accept my application for such and such position. Attached is my cover letter and resume. Again, include your name and your contact information, and that's enough. Everything that you need to tell them, it's in that resume and cover letter. Okay. And then just a note on where to actually look for some of these jobs. In Saskatchewan, SaskJobs is a key one. It aggregates a lot of different job postings from different places as well. Careerlink.usask.ca, so that's the University of Saskatchewan specific one, so that's for students and alumni. A lot of positions, companies tend to only post them on CareerLink because they're looking for U of S students. So make sure that's part of your job search. Indeed Jobs is a common one. LinkedIn has job postings as well. And of course, company websites. So some companies, they only use their own careers page. And so if there's a specific company that you're interested in working for, make sure that you just save their careers page and you're going back and looking fairly regularly for new positions that they're posting. Okay, so just last key things that I want you to take away from this. Again, the success that you have in moving forward in the hiring process, it really comes down to your ability to effectively connect and articulate the skills and knowledge and experience that you have to that specific job that you're applying for. So you really need to make a strong connection there. If you are, again, lacking in relevant experience, that's okay. It just changes how you're going to write that resume. So you're going to instead focus on your skill sets. You're going to use that functional or combination style resume. And again, go out there and get involved in whatever way you can and build up your skill sets. Absolutely want to tailor that cover letter for every job that you apply for. Avoid having it sound like a template cover letter. So a template is just where you're switching in and out the company name and the position title and everything else stays the same. So make sure you tailor that cover letter. The resume should be tailored as well, but if you're applying to very similar types of positions, it may not change all that much. But certainly, at least that opening paragraph on your cover letter, that will change. I definitely encourage you to create a LinkedIn profile as well. It's basically just your online resume or CV. A lot of it is kind of just copying and pasting what's on your resume or your CV and putting it into your LinkedIn profile, and then maybe adding a few other little things like a summary statement. Social media, just a note on that. At some point in the recruitment process, they're checking out your online presence. So just be aware of what your online presence is like. If you're at all concerned what's on your, Twitter or Facebook or any other social media platform, just make sure that your privacy settings are set very high so they can't get in there and see it. And then lastly, Career Services, we offer appointments, resume talks, where we can help you go through any of these documents, provide you with suggestions for how to improve them. I also encourage you, if you're applying to a specific job, you can sign up for a resume talk and include that job posting as well. And we can look at how well you're actually tailoring those specific documents to that job. Okay, so that's it for the presentation. I'm just going to show you really quick our website here. You're going to find some resources. So this here, it's students.usask.ca. So hopefully a website that you're already familiar with. The job section here is all of our content from Career Services. And I just wanted to point you to the resumes and CVs section here. And so you'll find a resume guide, cover letter guide, and CV guide. All of these things cover everything that I've talked about in this presentation and go into a little bit more detail. And I just want to show you the resume guide real quick here, just so you can have an example of what these different resume types look like. So here's that chronological style resume. And so what you'll notice here, the highlights of qualifications, again, it's just like maybe 5 to 7 bullet points, very high level, speaking to your skills, education, most important experience. This person has relevant work experience, so they're going to be spending quite a bit of room on the resume talking about that work experience. So that's in contrast to when you don't have a lot of relevant work experience, in which case you might be doing a functional style resume. And here's that summary of skills section. So again, thinking back to that job posting, so maybe they identified community service and leadership is like the 2 key skill areas that they were looking for in their candidate. And so then you're just breaking it down into components of those skills and then attaching it to whatever evidence that you can. And then work experience, maybe it's not particularly relevant And so in that case, perhaps you're just talking about the position title, company, location, and dates that you work there. And anything that's really relevant as far as skill sets just moves up into the summary of skills section here. So there might be bullet points speaking to that McDonald's experience up in here. And you don't need to get into any detail down in the work experience section. Lastly, combination style resume. So this is where you do have relevant work experience and you want to get into some detail on that, but at the same time, you really want to highlight your skill sets. And so you would include, instead of the highlights of qualifications, the summary of skills. And otherwise, they're essentially the same documents. Okay, so that is it. And now we can open it up to questions.
That was fantastic. I'm just like waiting for my rural internet to connect, so apologies for that. That was as always. Thank you very much, Brock, for being with us. I'm going to stop the recording, but if any of you have questions for Brock, please either feel free to unmute yourself and ask, or put them into the chat. And big round of applause for Brock.
Thank you.
Thanks for being with us.